Well, welcome to the New Hampshire Institute of Politics at St. Anselm College. My name is Neil Levesque, and I'm the executive director here. We have about 6 to 8 big events like this a week, so I encourage you to get signed up if you like civics, politics, economics, foreign policy. Get signed up on our website. You can find out about more exciting events like this that are happening. I just want to quickly introduce Adam Markham. He's the president of Clean Air Cool Planet. Adam has led Clean Air Cool Planet, nonprofit headquartered in Portsmouth since 2000. Mr. Markham has a background in science and conservation. For many years, led the World Wildlife Fund's international programs dealing with pollution. He has written extensively about the potential impacts of climate change and was a contributing author of the 1995 IPCC report. I'm sure you all know what that is. Under his leadership, Clean Air Cool Planet has helped businesses, college campuses, and local governments in helping New Hampshire and nationally tackle their energy challenges, reducing carbon pollution and reducing costs. I want to welcome you up, Adam, to your stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here today at the Institute of Politics, and it's been fun walking around looking at all these incredible political photographs around the place. Clean Air Cool Planet is a non-partisan, non-profit, and we are working to find bipartisan solutions to environmental problems. And to that end, we're particularly interested in economically efficient policy solutions, and so that's why we're so happy to be involved here today. We're going to hear today a lot about how tax reform may help us solve many of our problems regarding environmental health and economic health. And that, I think, is why you're all here today to listen to Art Laffer in just a few minutes, so I will not stay any longer. I just want to introduce Doug Holtzekin from the American Action Forum. Doug has had a distinguished academic career holding faculty positions at Columbia and Princeton and Syracuse. He's a former director of the Congressional Budget Office. He was senior economic policy advisor to John McCain's presidential campaign in 2008. And he's now the president of the American Action Forum. So I'd like to welcome Doug Holtzekin.
Thank you very much for the gracious introduction, and I want to thank Neil and the Institute of Politics for co-sponsoring this event. This is a great occasion, and I am delighted to have the privilege and honor of introducing Art Laffer. It would be a fabulous introduction if I were to simply introduce someone who had only one career. And Art has had many fabulous careers. He's been a successful businessman, and his leadership of Laffer Associates has been simply outstanding. And I encourage everyone to visit his offices in Nashville, the finest offices one will ever see. He's one of the leading policy advisors in the United States, and has held positions such as the chief economist at the Office of Management and Budget. He's been a consultant to the U.S. Treasury. He's been a close confidant to many influential politicians and advised them on sound economic policies for the United States to grow more rapidly. And he's also a distinguished academic. He's held positions at Pepperdine, at USC, at the University of Chicago. Anyone would have been proud to have one of those careers. To have before us today a man who's had all three, I think, is just a tremendous honor. But the biggest reason I think I'm pleased to have him here is that in addition to those things, he is a wise counselor, he's an outstanding family man, and he is a very good friend. And I welcome him to the stage, Art Laffer.
Gee whiz, that was... I'm so choked up I don't think I can talk. No, I love it, thank you. It's a real pleasure. It's Douglas, thank you. That was very nice. In fact, it's fun to be back in New Hampshire, by the way. As some of you may know, I spent a lot of my youth here in this state. I was a camper and counselor at Camp Pemigewasset up in Wentworth, New Hampshire, if any of you know that. And we used to do the Holderness tournaments and tennis and all that stuff, so I had a lot of my youth here, and of course I've spent a little bit of time since then here in 1980 with a candidate, what was his name? He grabbed the microphone and said, I paid for the damn thing. With the real president. And of course I was here in 1988 at the request of the president. He asked me to support George Bush, which I did, and I traveled this state with John Sununu for 3 days. We went everywhere, and I spent a lot of time with Mrs. Loeb. If any of you remember her, of the Manchester Union leader, wonderful people. I was with Bill and Mrs. Loeb in 1980, great people. And it's just fun being back here, and just great, and thank you for having me. I remember one little story that really stuck in my mind about New Hampshire. And you know, if you go up by White River Junction, and then you go across into New Hampshire and over the river into there, I remember this scene. It was just amazing. There was this little farmer there, and he was on the side of the road there, and this great big Cadillac pulls up. You know the type I mean, the Texans there? Really big hat, and had the horns on the front of it, you know the type there. And this Texan pulled up next to this New Hampshire farmer, and he leaned out the window and he said, "Excuse me, can you tell me, is this your spread right here?" And the farmer said, "Well, I guess we call it a farm here, but it is my spread, if that's the word you choose to use for it." He said, "Well, can you tell me how big you got this spread right here?" He said, "Well, the one corner over there, you see the big oak tree, that's one corner, and the bridge right over there, the creek, that's the other corner. My house is right down by the other, and then we have this little thing over here, the shed. That's the other corner, that's my old property, my farm." The Texan looks at him and gets this big smile. He said, "I don't know if you're going to believe this story, but I have a spread out in Texas. And I can wake up in the morning before the sun done ris, and I can drive my car right on my property all day long. And by the time the sun sets, I have not reached the other end of my property. Can you believe that?" He said, "Well, yes, I can. I once had a car like that myself." I love you people. You just really are the salt of the earth. And thank you very much for letting me be here with you. It brings back all sorts of memories. And one of the gentlemen over here had worked with my father closely, and just I was about to cry telling me stories about my dad. And my dad was my best friend. And let me, if I can today, and I want to reiterate what you said earlier. This is very political, what we're going to talk about, but it's not partisan. It's not left-wing, it's not right-wing, it's not liberal, it's not conservative. It's economics, people. And I want to make sure we all understand that it's not about personalities. And I know a lot of the campaign stuff has gotten into personalities. And just to start off, I want to just tell you that, in my view, I am a huge fan, and I mean this very sincerely, of the President of the United States. I mean, this man is an enormous success story. Black African father, white American mother. If that's not the essence of what we in America are as the melting pot of this world, I don't know what is. He was raised by his mom and his grandmother in a warm, nurturing, supportive environment. Little Barry or little Barack, whatever it was, succeeded everywhere when he was #1, always really an accomplished young kid. He was so good that he got into Occidental College from Hawaii. Now that's where my dear friend Jack Kemp went to college, if any of you remember Jack. That's where he went. Barack did so well at Occidental that at the end of his sophomore year he transferred to Columbia. He did so well at Columbia that he got into Harvard Law School. He did so well at Harvard Law School that he was named editor of Harvard Law Review. Let me assure you, you don't get that by affirmative action. You got to earn that. After Harvard Law School, he got an appointment at the University of Chicago, where I taught most of my life. And I want to assure you that only the very best and the very brightest ever get faculty appointments at the University of Chicago. Thank you, thank you. He is an incredible, he's President of the United States. They don't get more successful in politics than that. His wife, Michelle's gorgeous. They've got 2 kids. Did any of you see the Christmas card last year with the Obamas and the 2 children there? If you looked at that, you got cavities. It was so sweet. It's just incredible. This man is an enormously accomplished, wonderful person. If you went to Central Casting and asked for an American hero, he would be in the top 5. There's nothing wrong with Barack Obama personally. It's just that he's wrong on every single issue he deals with. And being wrong is not a character flaw, it's being wrong. And these issues are matters of economics, not a matter of personality cults or anything else. I want to go through a couple of them with you on what's going on. The political thing today, one of them is the role of deficit finance stimulus spending. You all know this. And it's, by the way, bipartisan. You saw it done under W. You remember Paulson with the $700 billion TARP, and then you remember Larry Summers, $600 per capita one, and then we did AIG, then we nationalized Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, we had the add-ons to the housing bill, the agricultural bill in 2007, then we had the $862 billion under Barack Obama's stimulus plan. You remember all that, and then we've had, I don't know if any of you have noticed, we've had a couple of deficits since then. Just small ones, not big. But if you look at this stimulus spending is huge. It's been in the order of $3.75 trillion. And if you compare that to total federal taxes in a year of $2.4 trillion, it's big stuff. Now, these other people think that stimulus spending creates jobs. And it doesn't. Stimulus spending not only doesn't create jobs, it destroys jobs. They think that this spending really does a thing, and I'm not going to go through it with you carefully, but it's true that the transfer recipients who get the money, they do spend more. But the people from whom you take the money, they spend less. There is no stimulus. But what also happens is the people who are given the money are disincentivized from working. And the people from whom you take the money are also disincentivized. And let me see if I can just make this very clear quickly. If it's good economics, it works just as well in a two-person world as it does in a 315 million person world. The only thing is, in a two-person world, you can understand it. When it's a 315 million person world and Chinese capital flows, credit default swaps, multipliers, velocity, you can't keep your T accounts going. You can't keep track. So let me, if I can, give you an example. Let's imagine we have a two-person world, and you'll see exactly what I mean. Let's imagine just a two-person world, Farmer A and Farmer B, okay? Nothing else, that's it. That's the whole world, nothing outside. Just Farmer A and Farmer B. If Farmer B gets unemployment benefits, who do you think pays for them? Am I going way over your heads on this one, people? Government spending is taxation, period. My colleague Milton Friedman, year in, year out, said government doesn't create resources, it redistributes resources. And you can't give to people, if you tax people who work, and you pay people who don't work. Do I need to say the next sentence to you? The reason we have the worst single recovery since the Great Depression is because of all the stimulus spending that has been done, not in spite of this stimulus spending. That is key issue on the ballot. Another key issue is obviously Obamacare, and Obamacare to me is not a problem with deficits and all that. Obamacare distorts incentives. That's what it really does. And I was on this debate in New York with against Laura Tyson and Nuri Robini, if you've ever seen them. Woohoo! And my partner was Phil Graham. And Phil Graham put it this way, I love this, is the problem with Obamacare, he said, like any insurance plan, you pay a lump sum in, and then you get the product below cost. That's what insurance is all about. And if it's a federal program, the government puts the money in and you get the product below cost. Phil Graham said that the numbers came out that you actually had to pay about 5 cents on the dollar for medical services that you got. You with me on that? The way he puts it, I love it. He says, well, if I could get my groceries the way I can get my health care for 5 cents on the dollar, I'd eat real well. And so would my dog. Listen, very simply, Obamacare is like putting me in a smorgasbord. It's not smart. I'm going to way overeat. And I'm going right to the caviar until I throw up. That is the problem with Obamacare. It's a huge distortion and a tax in the system without any benefits. The third one that's in a huge debate today, and then I'm going to lead the segue into what I really want to go on with you here, is tax rates. Tax rates and revenues. That Frenchman from the Midwest, what's his name, Buffet? Warren Buffet, you know the one I mean. He says you got to tax us billionaires more and us trillionaires more. And, every single time we've raised tax rates on the rich, revenues as a share of GDP have come down. They really have. If you look at it from the 1920s, where they cut the highest rate from 77% down to 25%, revenues from the top 1% of income earners went way up during that period, in spite of the fact that the highest tax rate was dropped from 77% to 25%. During the Great Depression, when rates were raised up through the ceiling there, tax revenues from the top 1% of income earners dropped as a share of GDP. When John F. Kennedy, my hero, cut the highest marginal income tax rate from 91% to 70%, and we had a thing called the go-go 60s, just like the roaring 20s. Boom, when you cut those tax rates. Tax revenues from the top 1% of income earners went up. When you had what I like to refer to, again, you guys know them personally, but I didn't know them all personally. I knew a bunch of them personally. But what I like to refer to as the Four Stooges, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and Carter. The largest assemblage of bipartisan ignorance probably ever put on planet Earth. They raised taxes throughout the whole process. Revenues as a share of GDP from the top 1% of income earners went down. And then, of course, when he became president, when the real president took office in 1980, we cut taxes a lot. And they've been cut over a lot of years. We cut the capital gains tax in Steiger-Hansen, you remember that one? And then Reagan cut the highest rate from 70% to 50%, now down to 28%. And we cut taxes on everyone who crawled, everyone who ran, everyone who sat still, everyone who jumped, everyone who flew, everyone who swam. We couldn't find a tax that we didn't want to cut. And it didn't just stop with Reagan, it kept on with Clinton. I mean, when you think about Clinton, he had the biggest capital gains tax cut in our nation's history. He dropped the highest rate on capital gains from 28% to 20%, but even more than that, he exempted owner-occupied homes from ever paying capital gains taxes. He cut government spending as a share of GDP by more than the next 4 best presidents in U.S. history combined. He put in welfare reform, the idea that you actually have to look for a job to get welfare. There you go. How unfair of you. I mean, if you look at Clinton, he also got rid of the retirement test in Social Security. If any of you remember that, the retirement test in Social Security. I mean, Clinton reappointed Reagan as Fed chairman twice. I mean, you're amazing president there. If you look at revenues from the top 1% of income earners, in 1978, revenues as a share of GDP were 1.5% of GDP in 1978. Of total income taxes, the top 1% paid 17.5% of total income taxes. In 2007, revenues from the top 1% of income earners as a share of GDP went from 1.5% in 78 to 3.2% in 2007. Is that a good enough rise for you? They paid 42.5% of all income taxes in 2007 from 17. This is the issue. Do you raise taxes on theirs? I'm going to tell you, if you do that, you're going to play that film backwards and you're going to get less money and you're not going to have prosperity. These are the issues. What we really need to look to today, and what I really want to spend time with you today is on tax reform. And if you look at tax reform today, it's more than just cutting every tax. It's how do you collect the requisite revenues you need to run government. That's really what you want to know. The theory underlying taxes here, it dates back to Henry George, who was an economist in California in the 19th century. And what you really want to do on taxes, and I think you'll see this fairly intuitively, is you want to tax those things the most that can escape the least. And those things the least that can escape the most. If you tax something and it leaves for whatever reason, you don't do anyone any good. You don't collect any money and the people leave and you lose all their productive resources. So what you want to do is tax those the most that can escape the least and those the least that can escape the most. Now, normally in tax issues, it's really hard to really figure out what can and what cannot escape because there's so many ways of escaping. What happens is this devolves into a very simple thing of the most optimal tax, if you don't know all the elasticities, is a low-rate flat tax. And I'm going to describe it to you this way because there are 2 types of incentives in this world. There are positive incentives and there are negative incentives. By way of illustration, if you beat a dog, you know where the dog won't be, but you have no idea where the dog will be. The dog's going to take off, but you don't know what direction. If, on the other hand, you feed a dog, which is a positive incentive, you know exactly where the dog will be when you have the food. It's going to be right there by the food. Positive incentives tell you what to do, and negative incentives tell you what not to do. Don't put your hand on the hot stove. The stove doesn't care where your hand is as long as it's not on it, because it'll burn you. All right? if you look at taxes, taxes are negative incentives. They tell people what not to do. Do not report taxable income. They don't tell you how not to report the taxable income. You can use evasion, avoidance, underground economy, moving to another location. I moved from California to Nashville, Tennessee, because there's no income tax in Tennessee. I paid for my house in my first year's tax savings. Woo-hoo! I thought of the beach in Southern California. I looked at my house. It's not worth the trade. I like the house. I'll keep it. I mean, it's just amazing. They can change the location, they can change the timing of their income, they can change the volume of their income, they can change the composition of their income. Our wonderful friend, Warren Buffett. If you looked at his balance sheet today, you know he does all this stuff, you should raise tax rates. What a hypocrite. If you look at his balance sheet, he's got $57 billion, at least according to Forbes, in wealth, which is all in a form called unrealized capital gains on Berkshire Hathaway stock. Do any of you know what the tax rate is on unrealized capital gains? It's 0. Did he recommend removing that and taxing unrealized capital gains? Not! And how about his gift of $1.6 billion to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation? What's the tax on that one? Oh, 0 again! I mean, don't you wish you had enough money to be able to give away $1.6 billion this year? Wouldn't it be fun? You know, he didn't recommend any of those. What he recommended was he raised his tax on everyone else. If you look at this, and I'm using your definition of income, Douglas, when you were head of the CBO, I stole it right out of your testimony. If you use the Simon definition of income, it's the increase in your wealth plus the amount you spend and give away. Warren Buffett in 2010 had an income of $11.6 billion, not the $40 million he claims as taxable income. He paid taxes of $7 million that year. That's 0.06% of his income. And then he recommends that you go after the billionaires there by raising tax rates. The only way the poor can ever become wealthy is by earning income. The income tax is not a wealth tax, and it doesn't hit the richies. The income tax hits people who want to be rich, who are trying to earn it. And if you make the tax codes hard enough, no one will ever be able to become prosperous in this society. We've got to reform the tax codes to make it sure that people can become prosperous. The dream in America has never been to make the rich poor. The dream in America has always been to make the poor rich. Or if I can do Jack Kennedy's quote here, which I loved, the best form of welfare is still a good, high-paying job. You know, you can't become prosperous on handouts. Honest people, you know, have you ever heard of a poor person spending or taxing himself into prosperity? It's stupid. I mean, it's just plain ignorant. And that's where these policies go. What we need to do on the tax codes, my view, is I did the tax code, if any of you remember, for Jerry Brown when he ran for president in the Democratic primary in 1992. Jerry Brown proposed getting rid of all federal taxes, all of them. Personal income tax, corporate tax, payroll taxes, both employer and employee, Medicare, Medicaid taxes, capital gains tax, estate tax, getting rid of the excise taxes, of the tariffs, getting rid of all of those taxes. Totally. Well, with one exception, which I'll come back to in a second, but the one exception are sin taxes. These are taxes that are put in place not so much to raise revenues as they are to change people's behavior. I guess, you know, there's federal fines, speeding tickets, that type of stuff, you know. I guess here in America, we Americans don't like drunk people smoking while we shoot each other. No. Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, I just thought I'd put it in together, just have a little fun with you. But what Jerry Brown did, and he proposed then 2 flat rate taxes. One a flat rate tax on business net sales, value added, and one a flat rate tax on personal unadjusted gross income with very few deductions. If you had those 2 taxes, static revenue neutral at full employment, you could collect the requisite amount of revenues to have a static revenue neutral tax with a tax rate below 12%. No deductions, exemptions, exclusions. Can you imagine what this economy would look like if we had 2 flat rate taxes, one on business net sales and one on personal unadjusted gross income at 12%? I mean, you wouldn't even have to file a tax return. Your company owes you $100. They send $12 in and give you $88. You wouldn't even have to file it. I don't know if any of you saw my piece I did in the Wall Street Journal on the additional costs of paying your income taxes, of filing, lawyers, accountants, H&R Block, the IRS, all that stuff. For every dollar in taxes you pay, in income taxes, you also pay out of pocket 30 cents in addition. That's an outrageous tax code that collects $1.30 from you to give $1 to the government. It makes no sense at all in that process. You know, if you did this tax code, you could really create a political, and some of the taxes we're eliminating are really wonderful taxes to eliminate. I mean, the one that just is vulgar to me is the estate tax. I mean, it's so vulgar. I mean, here you are, you can earn your income and pay your taxes fair and square. You can take that money to Las Vegas, and you can carouse, you can gamble, you can drink, and you can smoke. And as far as my federal government's concerned, that's your money, God bless you, go have a good time. But if you take that same money, you rat, and give it to your kids, we'll nail you for that. I mean, it is really totally immoral, totally wrong, and it doesn't collect any revenues, but it causes huge damage in society. The corporate tax. I mean, imagine you get a great corporation, makes a phenomenal product that everyone wants, and it cherishes our precious natural resources, and it makes that product very efficiently at a very low cost. And it also wants to play the game fair and square, so it doesn't hire any lawyers or any consultants or any lobbyists or any of that stuff. It just pays its taxes. Okay, makes a great product and costs little and doesn't do anything to protect its income, and it'll pay. We'll just tax the bejabbers out of that company. Now take the next company, which has a lousy product no one wants, makes it really inefficiently with a lot of expenses, hire lots of lawyers and lobbyists. We'll subsidize the living heck out of that one. Solyndra comes to mind right away. You know, it is absolutely immoral. With these two flat rate taxes, we could have the economy going. The sin tax is one which is part of the reason for being here today. Is there are ways of taking care of social issues if you want to make decisions. You know, there are people who worry about tobacco, alcohol, firearms, speeding, all these are all sin taxes. You know, this flat tax proposal, way of dealing with it, really has a very easy way of dealing with it. I use this with regard to global warming. I don't know whether global warming exists or not. I'm not a climatologist. I don't even know what one is or if I've ever met one. You know, they used to tell me about water shortages in California. And when I hear the news that there was a water shortage in California, I go to my faucet, turn it on, came out. It was all right as far as I was concerned. But when you look at this, what you can do in this, if you want to change the value of carbon emissions into the environment, you can put on a carbon tax. But the reason we all dislike a carbon tax as a standalone is a carbon tax is a tax increase, and it will destroy the economy. If you take that carbon tax and use it as an offset and cut tax rates on everything else on the flat tax, you will offset all the negative damage done to the overall economy. I don't know whether we have a global warming problem or not, I really don't. But if you do decide you think we do have one, I do know how to make it efficient. And I do know how to make the tax codes work such that it does the least possible damage and maybe even a little good in the overall system on a carbon tax. But when you look at this, and I want to push you here, this, I did this with Al Gore, as some of you may know Al Gore. I worked on this with Al Gore because, you know, he is absolutely convinced beyond belief, and he really is honestly convinced that there is global warming and it's all done by man and it's carbon burning. And my worry was the damage it does to the economy. And what we did was we did a paper together, where he put on the carbon tax and then we got rid of the income tax in its exchange. In that type of situation, you'll do very little economic damage. In fact, you might even do some good in today's things. But the reason you want the flat tax and tax reform is to allow this type of policy to be put in where it doesn't cause enormous harm. And that should be a requirement like a balanced budget amendment. I mean, you should make sure that any additional tax you've got a static revenue, do it and offset it. When you look at some of these issues, and again, I want to stress, it's not partisan. I mean, it is political, but it's economics, people. And if you don't think partisanship can exist, and in this day and age, it sure as heck doesn't look like it could. But I don't know if any of you remember, I don't think any of you are old enough to remember back in Jimmy Carter's day. You know, things were really hostile back then, too. We had a guy named Tip O'Neill. He was just little, I remember Reagan's comment about him as Tip O'Neill's like the budget deficit. Big, fat, and out of control. Reagan did it with a smile, you know. But Jim Wright, do you remember Jim Wright? Do you remember Dan Rostenkowski? All of these wonderful people. It was really hostile back then. Reagan, when we took office, Reagan's command was, well, two commands. And if any of you want to see this, I did a little booklet posthumously with the president. They found it in the Reagan Library. It was called the Reagan Initial Actions Plan, which they asked me to do the introduction, so it was really sort of fun, like Natalie Cole just sort of did that duet with her father. It was just, I was in tears to be able to do this, and it was lovely. But if you look at, Reagan demanded that we write all the legislation. We don't put it in the House or the Senate to write it, because they're by their very nature partisan. We wrote our tax bills, not the legislature. Not only that, but he said we have to have each tax bill co-sponsored by a Democrat and a Republican, period. No choice. That's it. The first one we had, you may remember, we had a spending bill in 1981. We got a good friend of mine who's also an economist, a PhD economist, professor, co-sponsored a Democrat. He was on the Senate House budget from Texas, a guy named Phil Graham, one of my dear friends. It was Graham Lotta was our spending bill, if you remember that one. When we went to the tax bill, the tax rate bill, we had to get a Democrat there, and again, a good friend of mine who was also a PhD economist, professor of economics, and a congressman. He was from the Caprock area up in Lubbock area around Texas up there, had Mahon's old district in Texas. He was on House Ways and Means Committee. A guy named Kent Hance. The bill was Hance-Conover. Conover was the Republican, Hance was the Democrat. Those were our two bills. Let me tell you, Phil Graham got harassed so much that he had to drop out of the Democratic Party and run for re-election as a Republican and was elected. Kent Hance was thrown off Ways and Means by Dan Rostenkowski, his punishment for co-sponsoring Reagan's bill. But let me take you what happened, just to go back in time. The tax cut bill, this is a 25% cut in tax rates across the board. It passed the Senate in August of 1981. Do any of you remember the vote? 89 to 11. 35 of the 45 Democrats voted with us. 10 of the Democrats voted against us. And one Republican voted against us. I still believe it was Lincoln Chafee from Rhode Island. I swear to God it was. But he doesn't believe in Christmas anymore, I guess. Just having fun with you. But now let me take you to the real one. You want to know, that's bipartisan. That's what we did. That's what's going to happen again. Now let me take you to the real one, the 86 Tax Act. Whew. Boy, did the rich get a break on this one. They cut the highest tax rate on the rich, the highest marginal income tax rate, from 50% to 28%. Is that a good enough tax cut for you on the rich? Not only did we cut the tax rates on the rich, we raised the tax rates on the low incomes. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Reagan raised the lowest rate from 11% to 15%. So it cut tax rates on the rich and it raised tax rates on the lowest income earners. Now it got rid of a lot of deductions, exemptions, exclusions, and loopholes in there, so it was revenue neutral. The vote on that bill, please, help me on that one. Come on, help me. 97 to 3. Simon, Melchior, and one other Democrat voted against it, and 97 senators voted for it, including Al Gore, Bill Bradley, Chris Dodd. Oh no, Joe Biden. Oh my goodness. Not only Joe Biden, but Alan Cranston. I mean, that wasn't only Sam Nunn and Dave Boren. It was that, and none other than Teddy Kennedy. Bipartisanship is not dead. Good economic tax reform is the sine qua non of prosperity in this country. And if it's done correctly, it can be done in such a way to be enormously flexible, to be able to take over and accomplish and inculcate policies that are really necessary for the nation. It's an enormously flexible system that allows us to go forward. And with that, I'm going to throw it open for questions. Yes?
Mr. You also had a talk apparently about the gap between the very rich and very poor.
About the what?
The gap between the very rich and very poor.
Yes.
I'd like to know your view on that, whether there really is that gap. Also, if it is a gap, and it potentially harms the country, what type of tax adjustments might be made to keep the gap from growing or to shrink it?
Yeah, I do believe the gap is very, very large, and I do believe the gap has grown, especially on standard income forms, although rich people have dropped a lot in their wealth in the last 4 or 5 years, which has really hit upper income groups a lot, but there's a huge gap here. My view is you don't get that gap by having everyone unemployed and poor. The dream in America has never been to make the rich poorer. The dream has always been to make the poor richer, and frankly, there is no alternative to economic growth. None. And you can't become prosperous on handouts. And this administration is trying to get people to be prosperous on handouts. It's, poverty is terrible. And if you look at the poor, I mean, look at the minorities, I mean, those people without a high school education, have you seen what's happened to them in the last 4 or 5 years? It's terrifying. If you've seen what's happened to black Americans, it's unconscionable what's going on there. The poorest performance ever. Teenagers. I mean, teenagers, if you look at the teenagers, black teenage unemployment's the highest it's ever been. Summer jobs are the lowest they've ever been. These kids, they'll never be brought back into the mainstream. I mean, let's take an inner city kid. I mean, he can't get a job at the minimum wage. He's not worth it. After being unemployed for a year or two, the kid becomes unemployable. After being unemployable for a year or two, for some reason, I don't know why, the kid becomes hostile. And then you have to spend a fortune protecting yourself from him. We are losing huge segments of our society day in, day out on those that are the most vulnerable in our society. That's where our gap is. And the problem is they're trying to solve it by stimulus spending and by doing everything that's wrong in this country. Printing way too much money, spending way too much money, trying to tax people who shouldn't be taxed or job. You can't love jobs and hate job creators. You just can't do that. It's wrong. And what you've got to do is get the regulations down, get rid of Obamacare, get rid of Dodd-Frank, make Sarbanes-Oxley applicable to only countries that have, companies that have a billion or 2 billion market cap so it doesn't kill all startup companies. And you got to have free trade. I mean, there are some things we Americans make better than foreigners. And there are some things foreigners make better than we do. We and they would be foolish in the extreme if we didn't sell them those things we make better than they do in exchange for those things they make better than we do. It's called the gains from trade. It's called comparative advantage. David Ricardo, hello, has Obama ever heard of it? And this is what has to be done. I mean, I was a little disappointed in your state because the evidence is so clear. But, the right to work really does increase a state's economic growth. Yeah, it really does. Look at the 22 states with the right to work bill and look at the 28 states that don't have it. Take a look at the growth rates. And take a look at what happens when a state adopts a right to work bill. What happens to its growth? And I can go on and on. But you've got to create growth. And that is the only way of removing that gap. Benjamin Hooks, again, I don't know if any of you remember Benjamin Hooks, head of the NAACP. I mean, a great American. But his comment was, with tongue-in-cheek a little bit, he said that blacks are hired last and they're fired first. The only way we're ever going to get jobs and keep them is if there are so damn many jobs around, they gotta hire us. And that is the way it's going to work, and that's the way you bring that gap down. You don't make the successful unsuccessful and say we've eliminated the gap. That's silly. Yes, sir.
I'm fascinated by the recollection about the tax code changes during the Reagan administration. Because we're so far away from that.
I know.
So far away that I don't think how do we get to that place again where, is it a lack of leadership? Is it someone at the top that can inspire the country to go to a common place where we can actually get our deficit in a position where we can actually start closing the gap?
Yeah. I know you guys go through something here that's a huge ritual every 4 years. And it's in both parties. And it's really an amazing thing you do. But it is very hard to tell what a candidate will do if elected. It is really very difficult. The Mexicans have a phrase for this. is that the sash makes the man. My president, the real, would you forgive me for saying that, Ron? I've been working with him all my life, and the reason I worked with the real president for so long was not because he picked me out of a line of economists and said, I like the little short fat one over there. My godfather was his best friend, and so I've been social with the Reagans forever and ever and ever, and I go back with him and all of that stuff, and that's why I was so blessed to have a long, good role with him. But I want to tell you that people can change. And what you see now in these candidates, greatness can come out of someone you really think is a nobody. As governor of California, can anyone tell me what Reagan did as governor of California? Well, I'll tell you what he did. Ronald Reagan raised the highest corporate income tax rate from 9% to 11%, his own legislation. Ronald Reagan raised the highest personal income tax rate from 9.3% to 11.2%. What's your income tax rate here? I forget. 11.2%, can you imagine? And by the way, the higher rates in the federal level were higher then too. So I mean, it was deadly. He raised the capital gains tax rate from 9.3 to 11.2%. Ronald Reagan, these are all his own legislation, not someone else's. Ronald Reagan also was the biggest social spender of any governor up until that time. Ronald Reagan started the first, I think was the first in the nation to have a criminal furlough program, where the criminals get out on the weekends so they can practice their skills on raping, pillaging, robbing, murdering, and stabbing, so they won't lose those skills when they finally get out of prison. Okay. Ronald Reagan chaired the Equal Rights Amendment. Are all of you aware of that? Did you know that? Did you know that Ronald Reagan, through his own legislation, eliminated all the anti-abortion statutes in the state of California? He was the pro-choice governor of the nation. That was Ronald Reagan. Now, I used to tease him about this, and seriously, I did. I didn't tease him too far, but I said, you know, sir, as governor, he said, I know, Art, I know I wasn't any good as governor. I didn't do a very good job, now did I? I said, sir, those are your words, not mine. He said, no, I didn't, but at least I'm not better than those other damn governors. At least I learned from my mistakes. They don't. But the truth, who would believe that man could become the greatest president of the last century? And he was. Take a look at Jack Kennedy. I mean, what type of congressman was he? What type of senator was he? You know what he was. He and his daddy. And who would have guessed that little rich playboy would become such a great American president? But he was. All I'm asking you is look carefully and don't ever knock anyone out because they don't currently match Reagan or Kennedy's stature. Reagan and Kennedy, before they were elected, were not Reagan and Kennedy. And I used to tease the real president. You don't mind me telling a couple of these stories to you? I used to tease the real president that it was my professional assessment as a professor and as an academic, as an economist, my professional assessment that my comment to him was, you, sir, are a certifiable genius as far as I'm concerned. Now, I know you have a hard time believing this, sir, but some of my colleagues at the university, they don't really concur in my assessment, sir, of your intellectual acumen. In fact, some of my colleagues actually don't think you're very bright at all. But the one thing my colleagues and I do agree upon is that your one unique characteristic is your uncanny ability to select your four predecessors. Anyone following the heels of Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and Carter just can't look bad. And I will tell you very honestly today, and I was with him, in '76, if Reagan had been elected, you would have seen a very different Ronald Reagan than you actually saw. You really would have seen a different Ronald Reagan. You really would. It did take Jimmy Carter to create Ronald Reagan. And in the same breath that took Jimmy Carter to create Ronald Reagan, you can't imagine the great president that's going to follow Barack Obama. Another question? Yes, sir.
Two, one short.
I'm short. That's not funny.
It's a little off topic, but just a brief thought on Glass-Steagall, and then your thoughts on the fair tax.
I'm going to skip the Glass-Steagall one if you forgive me.
That's fine.
Fair tax is much better than our current tax code. I like the one I described to you a little bit better because it's mine. But the fair tax is a good tax. It's a, you know, it'd be great. It'd be so much better than the current tax code we have. I want to go there. Yes, sir.
Yes, I was riding towards Boston a few weeks ago, and there was a show playing on the radio that has a show every week, and he said, I just have to talk about this, but the economy, when you have a private sector job, it's an asset. When you have a government job, it's a liability.
Don't let me hear that. When you have a government sector job, it's a liability. When you have a private sector job, it's an asset. Milton Friedman had a beautiful, these are great one-liners. There's some government jobs that are wonderful, and there are some private sector jobs that are horrible, okay? But it's a good sort of generalization, what you just said. Milton Friedman said the way to get this economy going is destroy all the roads between the suburbs and Washington, D.C. Then just so they can't get to work, we'll have a much better economy.
It's about Obama adding government jobs.
I understand. I know. And a lot of people think the way Obama does it. By the way, we do need government. You all know that. I mean, but what you want to do is make sure that the costs of paying for the government services are less than the benefits you get from the government services, plus the toll for the troll of taking the money and putting it out. That's all. And when you go beyond that, you're going way beyond that and you're causing damage. And that's why I told you about stimulus spending. Stimulus spending is a tax, and it has made this economy the second worst economy in U.S. history. The worst economy since the Great Depression. And the only reason it's not worse than the Great Depression is because we didn't do the second round that Obama wants to do. And that's raise taxes. I mean, did any of you know what happened during the Great Depression? 1930, Hoover signed the law, the Smoot-Hawley tariff, the biggest tax increase on traded products in U.S. history. Down we came. He suffered this big, huge revenue losses there. We had a big deficit in the U.S. And what did this rocket scientist do? 1931, he passed a tax bill. Now, forgive me, Art Laffer, all you think about is taxes all the time. I graduated from Yale, and my classmate, dear friend, Bill Nordhaus was there. We used to debate. And Bill Nordhaus always used to say, all Art Laffer ever thinks about is tax rates. Well, heck, all I ever think about is sex. But at least I don't talk about it. So to Art Laffer, the whole world, I mean, Art Laffer's like a hammer. The whole world to him looks like a nail. You know, but seriously, they passed this tax bill in 1931. It took effect on January 1st, 1932. Forgive me if this is just too small to really shouldn't be mentioned because it's just not important. They raised the highest marginal income tax rate from 25% to 63%. Is that good enough raise for you? And they narrowed the brackets down. They raised the lowest rates too. They put on excess tax and everything. The walk, jump, swam, reel. They put on a gift tax. They raised the inheritance tax. They did the corporate. I mean, they did all those. And then Roosevelt took over. Roosevelt won the election. Took over in 1933. Did the Bank Holiday Act, which you all know what that did to monetary policy and all that. But then Roosevelt couldn't get enough money for spending, so in 1935, he put on a little bit of extra tax. They passed a bill that took effect on January 1st, 1936. It raised the highest marginal income tax rate from 63% to 79%. That good enough for it? On up to 83%. Continued on up to 83%. Raised the estate tax to only 90%. Put on a 25% annual retained earnings tax. You know how they're all worried about companies having cash. Why aren't they spending it to get America? Well, let's tax them for holding that cash. I mean, that's what they did. You wonder why it was the deepest, longest, worst depression in the nation's history. If we let these guys do that to us, you deserve what you're going to get. And it will be ugly. Yes, sir.
So you talk about the importance of free trade, and with
Perhaps China's currency manipulation, what steps would you take in that regard?
Let me imagine we had a country, and I'm going to do this. Let me imagine a country that manipulated their product prices so much so they gave all of their goods free to us. Should we nuke them for doing that? How rotten can they be to give us all their goods free of charge? What people don't understand, it's not jobs that matters really, it's spending that matters, it's income that matters. And you know, when foreign governments subsidize a product or anything like that, and we get it below cost, are you going to complain? Do you go to a store and say, God, you should not sell that to me below cost. I want to pay retail, if not higher. No. The point of it is, whatever they do, I would suggest to those countries not to manipulate their currencies and not to subsidize their export. That's bad for them. But if they do it, why not just take their goods for free? If Japan gave all of their cars for free, no charge, America, we love you so much, should we nuke them for doing that?
So you're saying that they can't continue it forever?
They won't, but even if they do, we'll still get it, the goods for free forever. It makes no sense for Minnesota to look for banana independence. So they have greenhouses in the frozen tundra there, and so they won't have to trade with Costa Rica. It's silly. And just as silly as energy independence. It is just stupid to have energy independence.
But nonetheless, Congress is looking at laws to close that gap with China all the time.
I know. They should come and take my cars. I'll teach you what free trade really is. Free trade is really free trade. Yes?
Right here.
Okay.
I have a question. You haven't talked about the, of all your examples that you've given about when tax cuts have led to rapid growth, one that seems to be missing is the George W. Bush tax cuts in early 2000s, where we had those 2 rounds and the marginal rates were cut for for everybody.
Yeah.
But we seem to have very sluggish growth. We had the jobless recovery, we had relatively low growth, and then of course we ended up with the housing bubble and the crash that came after. So can you comment on that? And also, what if anything, if not TARP, if not stimulus expenditures, what could have been done to keep us from a second Great Depression?
I like the second one better. I'll come back. But let me do the first one. I'm not a W fan. Sorry. I'd like to tell you I am. I would not have voted for the first tax bill at all. There were no marginal rate reductions. The second one had a few marginal rate reductions that I probably would have voted for. That was after 9/11. But what I remember George W. Bush is overspending. And not only overspending, he did the Larry Summers $600 per capita one, he did the farm subsidy one, he did the housing bill one, he did bailout of AIG, he did, do you remember Paulson? Hank Paulson standing there before Congress with his little bill, squealing like a 5-year-old in a scary movie, grabbing himself, you know, asking for control over $700 billion in a 4-page bill. By the way, that's congressional pages, because they have big, wide margins, they're triple spaced, they have their letters are printed big. It's really about 3 paragraphs. And he said, we can't have any hearings, the world's going off the edge. Do you all remember that? I've been in the White House a lot over my years. And I can tell you, whenever politicians make decisions, when they are either panicked or drunk, the consequences are rarely attractive. And I was there at Camp David when they came down from the mountain with the tablets on the 10% import surcharge, the wage and price control, the devaluation of the dollar, the job development credit. I was there when they did the cover-up for Watergate. I was there when Jerry Ford did his whip inflation. Now, remember, that's when I was at the restaurant with my classmate Dick Cheney and Don Rumsfeld, trying to explain to them that a 5% tax surcharge won't get 5% more revenue. You'll get less than that. You may still get more revenue, but you get less than that. And remember Jimmy Carter's National Energy Plan? I loved it. God couldn't have created a greater example for me of stupid politics. I mean, we had the Arab oil embargo. It's true, we did. That's a real problem. So what does this guy do? Well, we're running short of energy and of oil and of energy, so he puts on wellhead price controls on the oil wells in the U.S. Now that stimulates supply now, doesn't it? Then what he does is he puts on an excess profits tax on oil companies to guarantee they won't produce any more oil. And lastly, he does gas rationing at low prices. So you have the long lines you had to drive through to get gas. Do any of you remember that stuff? How bad can it get? You know, if you look at Obama, that's the only thing that's close to Jimmy Carter. I mean, it really is. You know, Herb Stein back then, if you remember Herb Stein's famous theory, he was able to prove mathematically that the length of the gas line could never exceed the length it took to drive through with one full tank of gas. Now let me go to the second part of your question on tarp. My preferred thing is literally get a brown paper bag, put it over your mouth, and breathe in it until you calm down. And then slow down. You know, we have had many, many, many financial panics in this world, and they lead to, and then they're done. They're gone with. And then the world restarts again. Those who, those who borrowed too much in their houses, didn't have enough equity in them. There were banks that made loans that they didn't have enough capital for. I'm sorry, but it's not my money you're spending your own, and go under and let someone else come back in and do it again. It's called creative destruction. You cannot have a profit system without losses. You can't. And if you prohibit people from having losses, you'll guarantee you'll never have profits and never have economic growth. Witness the current economy. My view. Now, TARP, okay? I mean, all of my friends, and they were great. Steve Forbes and Jack Kemp and all of them wanted to do TARP. I wrote in the Wall Street Journal at the end and go, don't do it. It's the wrong thing to do. Let this thing happen. But no. But now, pretend you were going to force me. Dr. Laffer, enough of this stuff. Don't do anything, always don't do anything. Don't do any cut taxes, don't do anything. You know, all right. You've got $3 3/4 trillion to spend or do with as you want. Okay, that's the money. What would you do? I'll tell you exactly what I'd do. I'd have a federal tax holiday for 1.5 years. No income tax for 1.5 years. No corporate income tax for 1.5 years. No payroll taxes, employer or employee for 1.5 years. No Medicare tax for 1.5 years. No Medicaid tax. No excise taxes. No estate taxes. No capital gains taxes. No tariffs. No federal tax. 2.4 trillion a year. I'd go 1.5 years and still be in exactly the same position they are now. Can you imagine what would have happened to this economy if we'd have no federal taxes at all for 1.5 years? We'd be selling cars into central China, for God's sakes. We'd have the biggest boom. Grandma would be working overtime, scrambling with her false teeth. I mean, this would be a hyperactive society producing. If you want more production, reward producers. Don't reward consumers and take it away from producers and wonder why there's no production. It's dumb. No. Help me. I'll do one last one. Yes, ma'am.
I saw you in University 999. Can I ask how you feel about 59?
Let me just say, I like the 999 plan a lot. I love the way it's delivered. 999. I thought Herman Cain was really cool, and I like, and it's very similar to the type of plan I described a little bit ago. And the reason I like what Herman Cain did was, I think a presidential candidate, especially in a primary, should describe the dream rather than the practical, detailed plan going to it. Because practical details are what you do with Congress and work out all the things. And you know very well you don't always get what you want. And so, but when you describe that star, and that's the direction we're going to go, I love that, and I really admired Herman Cain for doing that. When I look at Romney's 59-point plan, and I've looked at it very carefully, it doesn't have the cachet of 999. It sounds more like 57 varieties Heinz's. You remember, it's sort of there, Baskin Robbins. But if you take a look at the 59-point plan, I mean, just randomly take a plan, they're pretty damn good. Now, each one of those on its own is a pretty reasonable suggestion. I mean, I was fairly impressed with going through it. When I look at the candidates and I look at Romney, if he does go along with his 59-point plan, if that's literally what he does put into place, I think it would work very well for this country. It doesn't have the fun flavor that the 999 had, but it's a very well thought out, well delivered plan. And again, I ask you just to go through and read them in isolation. Don't go through them really quickly. And each one, I think you really will like. Thank you very much.
Well, this concludes our program today, and I want to thank the American Action Forum and the Clean Air, Cool Planet for putting on today's event. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you.